Good evening or good morning. It's morning. No, it's not. It's afternoon for me. So wherever you are, welcome to the Hayden Institute of Education Diploma of Alcohol and Other Drugs. And this module is CHCMHS007, Work Effectively in Trauma-Informed Care. This is the final session of the module, and we'll be moving on to another module next week. So just to start off, we'll do the acknowledgement of country. In the spirit of reconciliation, Hayden Institute of Education acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the first inhabitants of this nation and the traditional custodians of the land on which we work, live, and study. We express our gratitude for the sharing of this land, our sorrow for the personal, spiritual, and cultural costs of that sharing, and hope that we may move forward together in harmony and in the spirit of healing. We pay our respect to all First Nation people and acknowledge elders past, present, and emerging. And we'll just start off with the housekeeping for normal class expectations. So obviously welcome to everyone. When we're having the class, when we're in session in an evening, we have the cameras on, everybody interacting, everybody with the camera on, and microphones off, cameras on so that we're focused and can interact with each other, and microphones off so that we don't get background noise and feedback and anything that isn't needed that disrupts the studying. It's a few hours of study, so roughly an hour of study and then a break. So we go 10 minutes at 7 and then 10 minutes at 8. With the interaction, it's important that interacting with each other does help the learning. So we'd love to hear from you. Please use the Zoom reactions button to put your hand up underneath the screen. Be mindful and kind with your words and respect the opinion of others. We're all learners and in this together. That is important. We're all trying to progress, develop, learn every day. With that, no smoking or vaping or drinking alcohol on camera. It's a bit like a TAFE session or a work staff meeting where it wouldn't be expected there, it wouldn't be allowed there. So we're trying to keep it, we want it to be the same here. Also because of triggers for people, if somebody's wanting to give up something that isn't healthy for them, they don't want to come on camera and see somebody else in the space doing something that they're trying to give up. And while we are conscious of other people, it's important to be kind to yourself. Look after yourself, make time for other activities in the week that nourish your mind and soul so you feel refreshed and ready for class every week. That's important. Whatever it is, just to focus on your health and your well-being as days go by and weeks go by. So just to start off, we will look at what we're studying tonight. We are still looking at trauma, referrals and documented resources. So by the end of the session, we're looking at trauma barriers, anger management, crisis management, detrimental practices, self-care, case studies. So just to start, sorry, I'm not sure what that's for. Pardon me. Trauma barriers to receiving support. So trying to get over trauma. We've looked at what it is in previous weeks before Christmas, trauma being a wound. Trauma being a wound in emotional or mental health area, as opposed to a physical wound that we might go to ED for. or we might be taken to hospital for a certain physical wound. With emotional and mental health wounds, they're a little bit different, can last a lot longer, and are dealt with very differently. So language and culture barriers and culture shock can limit the support for somebody getting over trauma. The emotional intensity, similarly to the depth of a wound. So the emotional intensity, the anger, the pain, overwhelm, depression, anxiety, and grief. If you build a lot of them emotions together, it's going to be very, very difficult for somebody to easily unpick them. The consequences can be that somebody can be numbed out, zoned out. We might call it dissociation from reality, from certain circumstances, from their emotions, even from themselves. It's an extended point. So learned helplessness and hopelessness, where the trauma is so severe that they feel unable to be able to help themselves, or they feel out of control in their life, so they don't feel like they've got the control of their life, or their emotions, or their recovery. And then when hopelessness comes in, then they're going to try and reach out for anything that they can. With the learned helplessness and hopelessness, then it feels like a lack of self-responsibility, that they're out of control anyway. And then eventually a victim mentality where life happens to them. Quite often bad bits of life that just keeps happening constantly. So just first of all, we've got a video. This is CPTSD. That's complex post-traumatic stress disorder. So we've heard how post-traumatic stress disorder, a disorder from that happens through trauma and stress, but when it's complex post-traumatic stress disorder, it's when there's lots and lots of trauma and stress reinforcing each other and emotional flashbacks. So I'll just find you the link for that. It will be in the email. That was easier. So this is no, the other one was better. I'm sorry. Sorry about that. The That's why I didn't have it in. The other one was definitely better. We'll see which one it is in a minute. Sorry if this is chaotic. It was meant to be set up perfectly. Anyway, emotional dysregulation, it can be a consequence of the trauma when our emotions are dysregulated and we're feeling elevated or low. It could be dysregulation going up and down, where the feeling, as opposed to emotions. Emotions would be the happy, sad, happy, sad, angry, all of the emotions that we feel. The feelings would be the physical sensations in the body quite often. So the stress in the body. So the emotional dysregulation, bringing the emotions back into homeostasis, not too high and not too low. Not giving up on a numbed out client, constant regular small check-ins, anger management techniques, validate the emotions, exploring anger as it rises, what happens when you're yellow, orange, and red, and draw the anger and explain it, bring the client to awareness about their anger and stages, strategies for when anger arises. So it's about sitting with the emotion, learning to sit with the actual emotion, if that's anger or fear, recognizing that it's there, but also recognizing the feelings as well that we have in our body, means that we can actually acknowledge and then move on from it. So emotional regulation techniques, these are helpful for anybody that has not a negative emotion. Apparently there's no such thing as a negative emotion. They're just emotions that are in the wrong place at the wrong time, really. Because all emotions are useful at certain times. So if there's an emotion that is not there at the right time, then we may want to regulate it. So we're looking at inner work with therapies, which are going to be extended ways to try and stabilize the emotion. Could be weeks or months with somebody. Meditation and breath work with a mindfulness activity, maybe. Journaling helps to get the emotion out of inside us and put it onto paper. Helps us analyze it sometimes as well. Drawing the emotions, art therapy. That's similar to journaling, but gets the emotion out. Tapping therapy, it's quite a clinical therapy where the therapist is interacting with the client that focuses on certain ways to alleviate the stress, is the best way to describe it, I guess. Whoops. External work, plan and action to find positive solutions. So the last video that I wasn't meant to have the screenshot for, this is the better one. It's talking about trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder, and flashbacks by Dr. Harry McCleary, and he's not just a psychologist, he's a veteran as well. So he understands everything from a peer works perspective. It's very, very good. It's about 7 minutes long. So I'll get the address for this. There it is. Harry McCleary. There's the website. Enjoy. I don't like the way it does that. Whoops. So when we break down gender and trauma, we've got gender diversity, we've got racial diversity, and the way it's split up into different demographic roles. And so a woman who's been sexually abused by a man will probably feel safer in a women-only service to avoid re-traumatization and offer a feeling of physical and emotional security. Similarly, Indigenous communities would feel, for many of them, would feel a lot safer in a agency service run by Indigenous community rather than white pommies, due to generational trauma and things that have happened in the past. We can't really avoid that is true, that people would feel safer in that community. So we've got to be aware of that. Then in some cultures, women would feel safer talking with other women. For example, in the Muslim culture, with men being the patriarchs and even being politely dominant, the male would be the dominant person in the family and in the community. So the women may prefer to talk to the women in that. Male equally would prefer to talk to men. In the Aboriginal culture, men's business and women's business would be separated. So it would be men to men and women to women. And then with elders, having respect for elderly people and youth equally. Youth, who would youth prefer? Youth prefer somebody that's as close to their age as possible. And we don't realize when we're young that somebody that's lived many, many years and has the wisdom of old age, we don't think that they're relatable to us when we're young. We want somebody that's close to our age to give us advice, though the advice to a young person from a young person is possibly the worst advice. And we don't realize that wisdom comes with age sometimes, and having access to that is really, really helpful for us. So youth are going to respect the younger person. So common beliefs about interpersonal violence. At fault, the person chose to stay, so it must be their fault. If they're still suffering violence, why didn't they leave? Minimizing, the violence only happened a few times. Excuses, alcohol and drugs caused the violence. Minimizing again. Emotional abuse, not as bad as physical abuse. And then common beliefs can lead to shaming the victim, leading them to feel unworthy of seeking help. These could be beliefs personally by the traumatized person, or they could be beliefs of the person in the agency, or there could be beliefs from a family member or a friend that the drugs and alcohol were at fault, the person was at fault for staying, so they should have just got out, or I should have got out, I should have left, so it's all my fault for staying. It only happened a few times, so it's not really that big. But in the end, common beliefs can lead to shaming the victim, leading them to feel unworthy of seeking help, which means the person might be locked into that helplessness cycle. So if a child or adult or elderly or disabled person discloses abuse or neglect, what happens? What do we do? We recognize, respond, and report. Take the person seriously, validate their concerns, get more information out of them, details and facts to the best that we possibly can in a safe environment. Trying to make them feel as safe as possible. If they willingly start to disclose something, that means that they're probably feeling a little bit safer anyway. So we've got to respect that. Writing an incident report, notifying your supervisor, our wisdom. Write a report if it's a child under 16, and make a plan, a safety plan for an adult over 16. So when trauma becomes a crisis, trauma is never healthy, trauma is never good or positive, but when it grows to a certain extent, it can become to a crisis situation. So self-harm or suicidal and risky behaviors. So with self-harm, children seek connection with others for soothing, reassurance, or comfort. Trauma survivors avoid connection and find other maladaptive ways to release tension, like cutting, scratching, or burning. Acting out on impulses and risky sex. Suicide and risky behaviors means speeding in the car, walking onto a busy street or dangerous areas at night. The risky behaviors could be pretty broad in that not seeing things as risky, but just not really being aware of consequences. Then all the way to suicidal thoughts and planning or attempted suicide. And then we're going to assess for suicide, obviously. Comparing with very high levels of depression. Specific questions. In the assessments, side issue, in the assessments, when talking about suicide, people don't want to address it. People avoid it. If I don't mention suicide, then hopefully it won't happen. Hopefully it won't be there. That's not the right way to deal with it. When people we can't put suicide into somebody's head that wasn't thinking about it um, in the first place. So we have to address it. We have to mention it in real life and in the role play. If somebody is potentially feeling the suicide ideation, we have to mention the subject. Um, Simply by mentioning it, we can diffuse it in the client, in the person that we're talking to, rather than what we might think as we might think, or I used to think, that if I mention it, I'm going to put it into their head and they're going to take it and walk away with suicide thoughts. It doesn't work like that. It works completely the other way around. When it's already there inside them, we mention it, the person feels seen, understood, and can release it, and they feel they can be accountable to the person that understands them. So, have you ever thought about taking your life? Do you know how you would do it? Do you have the means to do it? Have you got a planned time? Have you attempted suicide in the past? If somebody is very vague and doesn't really, they genuinely have no idea to some of these things, but they have said that they're considering suicide, it's not a very high risk. Somebody that answers positively to these questions and has a clear plan, that is somebody that's in a dangerous situation. So CAT, Crisis Assessment Treatment Team, is a support for us to contact. If somebody has tried to harm themselves or someone else, or you think they're about to, call 000 immediately, or go with them to an emergency part. Another option in a crisis is to contact your local crisis assessment treatment team at your closest major public hospital. Sometimes the CAT will be sent to you wherever you are. So they're a group of mental health professionals such as psychiatric nurses, social workers, psychiatrists, and psychologists. Very important that we have this contact in our heads for anything that we need to get to the bottom of. Other points of reference for us and person that might be suffering. So we've got in ACT, New South Wales, just focuses for support lines. What happens after a CAT assessment? The CAT assessment will make sure that you are supported during the crisis. Once the crisis has passed, the CAT team will then provide referrals to health and community services that can provide longer term care. So we're the middle person, again, with many things. We've referred them on, and we can still catch up with the person. We can still carry on our program with them and try and help them with any substance abuse issues. But this is a completely separate thing. Hopefully, working with the trauma and the suicide ideation will get them to a point where they're more able to address the issues that they've come to us for. So self-harm and risky behaviours. So we're going to assess the level of risk, consent from client to have a mental health assessment, case management from us potentially, depending on the urgency and need of the client, or from a mental health team case assessment, case management. So acute hospital care, that's short term, really. If it's mental health hospital care, like a week to 10 days in a mental health ward, potentially NDIS supported accommodation, potentially NDIS psychosocial package of services for support in the home, and maybe treatment from a psychologist specializing in trauma, possible medication as well, and alternative therapies. Just got a video to show. It shouldn't hurt to be a child. I'll bring this link up. When we're looking at trauma and children at risk, then obviously it's important that we're aware of what's happened. So with that video, if you Google "It Shouldn't Hurt to Be a Child," it's a song that's very emotive. It's all about child abuse. Um, just to, I guess, a bit of a disclaimer that not to watch it if you're already feeling a bit stressed or down. But with working with children, when we're thinking about possible abuse and neglect, we're looking for changes in behavior and presentation. So when we say changes, it means that we already know a little bit about them. We understand where their normal behavior. So if we don't understand that person or that child's normal behavior, then we can't really comment on whether there's been a change. So we might need to talk to somebody else that knows them, another professional, um, another member of staff that might know them well. Maybe a reluctance to go home from the person, being seemingly accident prone, um, excessive rocking, sucking, and biting, showing wariness and distrust of adults or too trusting, any of the extremes, that's meaning. Difficulty sleeping, often being tired and falling asleep. Inconsistent or inconsistent explanation for injuries. So 1 minute it's very definite that this is what happened, and then at another time, no, it wasn't like that. It happened in another way. And these are for children and adults. Low self-esteem, bedwetting or soiling, aggressive or demanding behavior, difficulty relating to adults and peers, difficulty concentrating, being withdrawn or overly obedient, creating stories, poems, or artwork about abuse. So self-care and secondary trauma. This is when we're looking at self-care, obviously we're hiding, well, I don't really know what that means. Obviously, we are advising the client to take good care of themselves and help give them strategies to look after themselves, health in physical health, mental health, emotional health. But when we hear certain stories of trauma, there's a danger that we can go through secondary trauma, that we can experience a trauma close to what they've gone through just by hearing it. So we need to put up boundaries. We have to know when to take a break. We need to make sure that we're scheduling in a debriefing with the supervisor or a line manager or somebody that we can talk to about the things that we're going through. We don't want to build up such a level of trauma from hearing other people that now we're in danger and we're more in danger than the clients that we're working with. We have to know our limits. So, what do you do for self care? We have to look after ourselves, even to the point that it might not be a massive breakdown very quickly, but it could be just we might reinforce the statistics that most community service people, workers, have a shelf life of a couple of years because due to lack of self-care, we burn out and we are no good anymore in that industry. We can last longer if we set boundaries and offload and have self-care. So case studies and role plays. We need to discuss the case studies in the assessment and maybe in the learner guide. I'll show you what the learner guide looks like. Probably seen it before. Um, Here we are. Again, CHCMHS007. And at the moment we've got, well, we've finished the module, aren't we? So it should, most of this should be understandable. Going from what is trauma all the way down, looked at the duty of care, looked at the legal system, gender difference, started that off today. Self-care, most of this done and little bits still to come back to. So the case studies, regular case studies all the way through that we usually look at. So make sure you know where the learner guide is. This is a good video as well. Not as important, but it's quite funny. Now, before the recap, didn't realize we were there. We just need to go to with child trauma, when we're looking at, first of all, trauma number one, and we're looking at the AOD point, we're looking at this point of view that certain negative things that happen to children when they're young mean that they will be more likely, 7 to 10 times more likely to report and engage in illicit drug and alcohol use with addiction than somebody who hasn't had the trauma. I'm just generally talking about trauma. So a survey of 8,500, just over 8,500 adults, showed that individuals who had experienced trauma, which specifically is 5 or more adverse childhood events, or ACEs, indicates or points to the fact that this child will grow up and probably get into addiction. When I'm talking addiction, I am meaning not just drug and alcohol, but addiction, gambling, sexual, codependent relationships, all sorts of addiction focused methodologies to try and soothe the problem that's there. So when we mention an ACEs, that was what the other page was. So there's 8 adverse childhood experience topics or categories. Thanks. So it's physical, sexual, and emotional abuse, emotional and physical neglect, living with a family member with mental health or substance use disorders, witnessing domestic violence, sudden separation from a loved one, poverty, racism and discrimination, and violence in the community. So if a child goes through any of these, a lot of children might go through like 1 or 2, sudden separation from a loved one, maybe grief, not just grief in death, but grief in a relationship that's been severed. A lot of children might go through 1 or 2, but it's saying that when a child goes through, how many was it? Sorry, 5 or more there. So if a child goes through 5 or more of these, there's a significant link to them having to being led to the addiction methods when they're older, which means when we meet a client that has got a long history of AOD issues, or I guess even if they're starting to have problems with the AOD issues, then it's the statistics are saying that it's highly likely there's a risk of trauma, that there's a highly likely that there's issues like this in the person's background, which means that we as AOD workers, we can't obviously heal this trauma, but we can point them to places where they can get the help. So with that, there's a video here that's quite confronting. It's good. It's a good video. Um, but it's not fun. So I'll give you the title. The adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, and it's the address there. Watch this one. If you don't watch any of the others, watch this one. It's very, very important. So before I move on, the other link, and I'm a bit disappointed I'm not there for the session this week, because the other link is the other link in the topic is when we're talking about trauma and we're talking about addiction issues and we're talking about AOD, it's all about relationships, obviously. Then I've got to mention Rat Park. It's like, I'm disappointed I can't watch it with you because it's a fantastic video. Only 5 minutes long. You have to watch this. So, like I said with the last one, if you don't watch any of the others, watch this one. Two very good videos. Now, moving on to the assessment, which I'm sure you'll be spending a lot of time on. Remembering with the assessment, this is what we're focusing on. This has got to be the topics of conversation. This is what we're talking about in the assessment. When I say we, I'm meaning you. This is what you're going to have to talk about with the client. So it's a very focused conversation. If this is what you have to talk about with the person that's undergoing the trauma, it's like got a direction. It's got a focus with the conversation. When we go down and look at your resources, we've got obviously a relapse prevention plan. It's important to understand it and use it. Code of conduct, that's something important that you're going to have a brief look over. But SMART goals, again, when I've said that the conversation has a direction, it's a focus, it's goal focused, it's SMART goal focused. So whether you might talk about just general goal setting, it might be a first conversation with the client. The SMART tool, the ABC problem solving worksheet. So rather than setting goals, you've got to look at the problem and you can deconstruct the problem and try and figure out where the person's going to start with focusing on something. A lifestyle audit might work. So looking at the whole of their life and trying to figure out, okay, what's the best place to start for them? Or even a SMART called tool log, urge log, sorry. So trying to analyze where the urges are. Look, when talking to somebody with AOD issues, it's not that the, and they might know, they might recognize, or they might not recognize that it's not just constant urges throughout the day. I want to use, I want to use, I want to use. It's the point that there might be periods through the day where they are desperate to give up and they're focused away from it and it's not affecting them and they want to be, they just want to happy to focus and never do it again. But then there's other parts in the day where they'll have such a craving, such an urge that they feel like they'll never be able to give up. And that's quite often linked to certain emotions that they're going through. And we're talking about trauma. So it's going to be linked with certain traumas that they're trying to live through. Um, if they're not fully aware of when these urges might be taking place, doing an urge log might help them a lot and try and pinpoint certain, to use AA's wording or phrasing, to try and pinpoint certain people, places, and things, certain people or certain areas or certain things that might trigger an urge would really, really help them to narrow down certain things. And then for a self-therapy thing, how to practice mindfulness. So even in your assessment, it would be a great idea to understand at least one or two of these. It's not going to be a very long role play, obviously. So you can't use all of these, but not using any of them would be daft, would be crazy. So this is obviously what we're looking for. I'm sure you understand all this. The worksheets above there, they're linking quite well with different perspectives that the client might be going through. So relapse prevention there, relapse prevention plan, managing cravings. Again, relapse prevention plan, helping them cope. And actually, I just thought I'd mention these are our tools, but when we think that these SMART goals, they might be from equally from Smart Recovery, that quick advertising. This is Smart Recovery. They do a lot of these tools as well. I'm sure we've mentioned it before, but we've got AA on one side, which is focusing on a lifestyle without substance use, without any substance use. Smart recovery is, rather than a lifestyle, it's day to day. So it's not massive life macro focused, it's minute, day to day, minute to minute, dealing with issues. Like the resources we've just been looking at. Ideally, the great advert there. Discover the power of choice. So it's trying to help the person gain control over the little things so that they don't feel out of control and then feel like they need to start to use something just to stay in control, which might often come up. Have a look at it, sign up to them. That's really useful. So with the assessment, yes, this is done with us. This is done with an assessor, so it's going to be done with me. We have to do it sometime. We have to figure out when we're going to do it. Would have been nice to do some in the session this week. We can't. So we'll do it another time. We'll book something in. But this is declined. Maybe if whoever is with you, maybe you might have done this with Vicky or whoever was in class this week, looking at Catriona as an outpatient. You've been counselling for a few weeks now. She's shown good progress in her recovery, and it's time to provide her with a relapse plan to make sure she has skills to use when challenges arise in her daily life. So this sentence here, this is almost smart recovery. And like I've said, smart recovery or AA or NA, it's not either or, it could be both. But they're both used for different ways. Here, smart recovery could be perfect. Showing good progress in her recovery and providing a relapse plan to make sure she has skills to use when challenges arise in her daily life. With AA on NA, it would be peer support where somebody else might be helping the client and saying, when I struggle like that, this is what I do. With smart recovery, it's a lot of methodologies where you might get a peer support person trying to give advice or offering what they would do. Also, you would get more of a therapist trying to advise as well. There might be a therapist there running the group. So it's not peers running the group in AA, as in AA. It's run by a professional. You'll take her through worksheets and support her in setting up a relapse plan. Obviously, like I said, in a short role play, you're not going to get many worksheets done, but it's going to be good to have it's going to be good to have a knowledge of them all so that you can give a rundown of different ones and say why each one might be useful for them. Discuss the strategies that Catriona already has in place and expect the new ones you have chosen based on her case history. Make sure that Catriona is comfortable with the new strategies and be prepared to offer other suggestions if she isn't. Throughout this role play, your assessor will be looking to see that you can follow AOD processes and protocols. So your assessment will be done. Well, when I'm saying I said it was with me, it can be done with me. You can go on a waiting list and do it with LSO again, obviously. Email them if you want to, or contact so that we can do it. And it's going to be, I'm looking for timing. There. Don't try and complete it on your own. It's going to be It's no timing on here, is there? We'll figure it out, won't we? It's either 10 or it's 20 minutes. So probably 20, I reckon. So I wanted to do a recap, an actual recap of everything. Here we go. So we've got trauma barriers, things that block recovery from trauma, anger management, emotional management, obviously not just anger, but fear and other emotions that are going to try and take control. Crisis management, when the emotions get out of control and we're trying to deal with consequences of hypervigilance or dysregulated emotions. Detrimental practices, self-care for us. If we know how to self-care, we can pass that on. That's really important. So self-care for us, and then case studies, role play. Mentioned a bit about children and abuse and trauma in there as well. So I'll leave it there. Thank you. Bye-bye. And see you next week.